Cool. Okay. Well, hi, everybody. My name is Nate Sheets. Thank you for joining us. Hopefully, you're all aware that the webinar today is kind of a test webinar. This is the first time we've done this kind of training. It's definitely different for me because there's no audience. So if I make a joke, I'm not going to hear any laughter, in which case it's not unlike a live training, I guess. Also, I have been dealing with a cold, so I might cough a few times, but I think we're going to be doing well. There will be a few times throughout the webinar where we're going to do some things that the software lets us do, like we're going to share files and do a poll, just to kind of see how that works, because I just don't know. So the first thing I'm going to do is share a file, and that will be the slides. Here on the internet browser, the program kind of makes my slides look a little grainy, and I spend a lot of time making them look pretty. So I am going to share this file, and so you're welcome to download the PDF to follow along or to read it later. That might be helpful for you. I'll give you a few minutes to do that. What's that? Once you download that file, you can minimize that window so you can go back and see the chat if that's something that you want to follow. So yeah, let's get started. Today, let me go to the right thing here. Today, we're going to be just going over quickly some essential supports for people with fetal alcohol spectrum disorders. And, there are things that just have to be done. That's why they're essential. So then the question is, if we know that people with FASDs need this kind of support, how do we make this happen in your family home and your family home and at school and in all of these different environments? So it's easy to say what somebody needs, but then we need help to kind of practically make that happen. So today's training is going to be really quick, but it will hopefully give you a starting place. And of course, if you haven't already, you can check out our YouTube channel. We talk about a lot of these principles in more detail. Just to go over some things again, this is a test webinar. Hopefully nothing will go wrong. Everything is looking good so far. My assistant is monitoring the chat as I keep talking. So if there's any big issues, we'll pause and just figure it out together. If the webinar does, for whatever reason, stop, please leave that window open, and we'll try to reconnect it for everybody, but also monitor your email. If worst comes to worst, we'll quickly create a new webinar and invite everybody to join us. There will be a video available. We might also post it on YouTube, just kind of depending on how things go, but you all who registered will be able to view the webinar at any time. For at least a couple of months before we delete it. And thanks for joining us. We have people from all over the United States and even from other countries. It's very cool to see that. Thanks for joining us. Just to quickly introduce myself, I'm a behavior consultant. That means that I work with families who have kids with various developmental disabilities on figuring out why certain challenging behaviors happen and what we can do to stop those challenging behaviors. I do that in the state of Oregon, and it's a big part of what we do. We also have our YouTube channel. I've been in the developmental disability field since 2008, so going on 10 years now. I have experience in foster care, family homes, group homes, and schools, consulting and helping people figure out why some behaviors are happening. And as probably most of you know, I specialize in fetal alcohol spectrum disorders. Just before we get started, I want to give a little bit of a shout out to some advocates with fetal alcohol spectrum disorders. There's a list here. You can find websites that you can connect with them. It's really important to me that we listen to people who are experiencing the condition that we're talking about, because I don't have an FASD. I've never been in foster care. So I want to make sure that I'm hearing those people's voices and honoring that. And I would not want anything that I would suggest to make them uneasy as far as how they know their brains work. So please definitely take the time to check out these advocates. Follow them on Facebook. You can reach out to many of them with questions. And especially for those of you who have maybe older children or teenagers or know an adult with FASD, if you look at the second item there, RJ Formanek, oh, sorry, RJ. That group that is listed there, the Facebook group, FASD Flying with Broken Wings, is a really great group for people with FASDs, and it's like a support group. So if the internet is an option for that person, please, consider having them take a look at that group. They might find something there, some support there, which is helpful. We're not going to spend too much time on what FASDs are. Obviously, they happen when a biological mother drinks during pregnancy. It can impact both the nervous system and physical system. So it impacts the brain, and in some cases, even physical aspects of a person's body. Most of us are also aware that for most people with an FASD, there is no outward visible sign. So the physical changes can also be internal and not seen. And so we're dealing with a unique disability here because we have people who look neurotypical, living their life in a world created for neurotypical people. Okay, guys, sorry about that. Hopefully that will not happen again. So we're gonna just keep on going, sorry. FASD can impact executive functioning skills, and we don't have time in this training to go over each skill individually, but that is something that I'm planning on doing in future webinars or trainings. We actually already have an executive functioning training. But our executive functioning skills are the skills found in the very front of our brain, and they help us to consciously control our behavior. So things like attention, planning, transitioning, impulse control, and a big one is emotional regulation. And most of those skills for a kid or an adult with FASD have been impacted. Now, that doesn't mean that those skills will always be at a deficit. Many of those skills can improve as so long as a person can practice them successfully, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. In the right column, we have other non-executive functioning skills, which are also impacted. So processing, communication, memory, perception, and social skills. So virtually all areas of cognition are impacted by a fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. The next slide here. Thanks for your patience, everybody. Sorry about that freezing. So additionally, FASD will impact a person's kind of everyday, what we call adaptive skills, because we use our cognitive skills to do things, right? So if you don't have the cognitive skills, then you're not going to be able to do a lot of these kind of everyday activities that you need. So things like taking care of yourself, keeping your hygiene, making your meals, going to school, going to work, self-direction, being able to be in the community and interact with other people. All of those things take cognitive skills. And it's really important that most of us are neurotypical adults, that we remember that the things that seem so natural for us, that don't take any effort, actually are very complicated. And when you don't have even one skill, or in the case of FASD, multiple skills, simple things are no longer simple and we can't perform them. So today we're going to go over 5 what I consider to be essential supports for people with FASDs. Those include taking extra time to give them time to think, for us to plan ahead and practice with the person various situations. We'll talk about that more. Using visuals, ultra important. Adjusting expectations, and trying to encourage mindfulness. And we'll explain that a little bit later. So let's first talk about taking extra time to think. Why do we need to do this when it comes to that cognitive skill level of things? Well, it can help a person understand what's being said. So a big skill struggle with most people who have an FASD is receptive communication. And receptive communication is our ability to process what's being said and also to read and understand figures of speech and all of those things. But we focus on just processing language. And for people with an FASD, you might know this, they tend to speak pretty well, but then they can't process at the same level that they can speak. And for us who are neurotypical, I really want us to take some time to think about that. Because if somebody matches Nate's vocabulary, I can process that. If they match my vocabulary, the speed that I'm talking about, the subject matter, I have no problem processing that verbally. But for people with an FASD, when we match their ability to speak and their pace and all of those factors that go into language, they can't necessarily always process. And so it's going to be important that we give them extra time to think. It also helps with executive functioning skills. So when we give somebody time to think, they can actually do more planning, they can understand more, they can process situations, and it can also help us with mindfulness, which we're going to be talking about a little bit later. Giving extra time to think is not an option. It has to happen. But the problem, and now we go to the next column as to why it's hard, is because when we, those of us who are here in the webinar, are having conversations, we're going back and forth really, really quick. And we can forget in our everyday life that this person may not be catching all that we're saying. And they're not going to be giving us necessarily any outward sign. We know this. They'll nod their head. They'll say, uh-huh. They're processing the best that they can. But when they can't process, that also will open up their brain to try to help them through confabulating. And we recently made a video about confabulation because they're just trying to process there. We're also used, we as neurotypical people, to essentially, most of the time, if we're doing well, understand things instantly. Understand language instantly, understand the gist of what people are saying instantly, and then we can adjust and plan and respond with our executive functioning system instantly, right? Again, assuming that we're not struggling with anything in that moment. So for us to remember to give somebody with an FASD time to think can be really, really difficult. And so we have to be mindful and intentional. And if we're not, we're going to simply forget. That's just what's going to happen. Anything I should be aware of? Sweet. I'm glad that it's working. So how can we practically do this? Well, we talk about this a lot in our YouTube videos, but if you struggle to give your kid time to think, you're going to have to practice. You're going to have to count the seconds in your head, literally, to make sure that you're giving them anywhere between, 10, and that's a low end, to a whole minute, 10 seconds to a whole minute to think about things. And for younger kids, you're going to be needing to give them more time. You might notice that when you want to give somebody more time, they still answer right away. So you ask them a question and then bam, they give you an answer that maybe they either haven't fully thought about what you asked or they haven't fully thought about what the answer should be. And so what I like to do is say, don't answer right away, just think about this. And then I say what I want them to think about. And then if possible, we kind of want to disengage completely, depending on the subject matter that we're talking about, right? If we're talking about something that has to do with behaviors, something that might escalate them, or just something that's complicated, maybe about how they're getting along with other kids at school, if we can disengage and leave the room and really let them think, we can see if that helps them to give us a more clear or thought out answer. These supports, I want us to remember, have to be used in everyday conversation, not just when we're talking about those deep, complicated things, but when we're having casual conversation, we got to be giving at least some time to think. And again, disengaging if at all possible. Another thing you can do kind of in your everyday life is when the kid asks you a question, or when your kid asks you a question, saying, let me think about that for a moment. Even if you already know the answer, right? Even if you could answer instantly, just kind of modeling what we really want them to do. Because our goal should be for them, when they realize that they need time to think about something, for them to tell whoever, hey, give me a minute to think, because there's nothing wrong with that. So we can model that by just kind of subtly doing it in our everyday life, just to show, hey, it's totally fine to intentionally take some time to think. The other thing you can do, if you have a spouse or a partner or a co-parent, or if you're a professional and you're working with other professionals, is to watch them and see if they're actually giving somebody time to think. And chances are they will not be doing a good job at this. Like we've discussed, it's kind of hard to naturally do. So if you can coach the other person that you're also working to support the person with, then that might help you guys to kind of keep on your toes in regards to that. So giving extra time to think, it's a big one. So somebody asked, what if they don't want time to think? So that kind of goes into opposition. I might table that for another webinar. We have a video on oppositional behavior. If they don't want time to think, it will really depend on the situation. I might choose to leave the room anyway. So even if they get a little miffed at me for not engaging with them right then, if I can leave and just let them think and not create a worse escalation, then I might choose to do that. Or really trying to be proactive and making a plan. So I might make my expectations clear. Listen, I'm not going to talk about this, right away. I just want us to start thinking about it and using that language like I need to think about it too. This isn't just about me forcing you to think. Like I need to think about it. And really, we also benefit from that same thing. So that's all I'll say on that right now, just because I want to keep moving through the training. And if I have time at the end, I'll answer a few more of those kinds of what if questions. So the next essential support is planning ahead and practicing. Why is it needed? Well, planning in real time is really advanced and it's difficult. And I'm not even just talking about the person with an FASD. Yes, they will probably struggle to plan in real time, but so do we. Again, we're going through our everyday life. We're running kids to and fro various sports or activities or appointments. We're trying to get dinner ready. We're trying to move kids from one activity to another in the home. We're trying to, get ready for bed. Whatever it is, if we have not taken the time to ask ourselves, will my kid need support during this? Then we're going to have to be thinking on our toes. And we don't necessarily always do very good at that either. So that can create more intense situations because now both of us are trying to do in real time thinking, and that's not going to necessarily have the best outcome. So we want to understand that for somebody with an FASD, or really any developmental disability, when expectations are not clear, when they don't know what to expect, that's going to increase their anxiety or their frustration. And most of my clients with FASDs, they have anxiety issues, and that makes sense because they're constantly being expected to use these skills that, again, we can take for granted, but that they don't have. So you might get these responses that might look like opposition, that might look like refusal, but it's really an anxiety response. And that can happen when expectations aren't clear or when you just don't know what's happening or you don't know what to expect. So it's important that we take steps to help the person know. Also, remember that just because somebody has done an activity at one point and they were successful, that doesn't mean a week later or even a few days later that they're automatically going to know the expectations or they're going to automatically know what to expect. So you might have to teach that multiple times before they, lock it in for themselves, or they might always need you to do that, which is fine as well. So why is planning ahead for us as parents, caregivers, professionals so difficult? Well, because a lot of times, especially when we're talking about family life, we just kind of go with it. We might have a general routine, which is great, but we're not necessarily planning every single aspect. And I'm not telling you that you have to plan every single aspect, but you do want to do some things just to kind of prepare. Another thing that makes it difficult is that we have to think ahead. And we don't necessarily think ahead, especially when we have a routine. We kind of rely on the routine and what we do. And so we're not necessarily thinking ahead for, oh, tomorrow morning's doctor appointment. What do I need to do ahead of time to prepare my kiddo? We also can't always tell when there is a behavioral issue that has to do with planning. And what we often get, like I said, in these moments is we get defiance, we get opposition, we get, I'm not doing that. But what could be going on is an issue of planning. And I did talk about that with, or on one of our videos recently. I had a client who, whenever her siblings would get complimented by her mother, she would escalate. So they could be sitting there, drawing quietly, everything's going well. Mom just says, hey, good job to one of, her younger siblings, and my client would escalate. She's 12 years old. Or they could be coming home from school, and they all come home from school together, and mom's pulling out notes from teachers, from her siblings, and she might say, oh, your teacher said you did a great job. And my client would escalate. And the thing is, when we asked her, what's going on here, she said, I'm jealous. So it looks like an issue of jealousy from our perspective, right? It looks like classic jealousy. And that was the word that she used. But, I think in terms of cognitive skills, and jealousy isn't a cognitive skill. And I thought maybe this is an issue of planning. So I told the mom, and by an issue of planning, what I mean is from my client's perspective, when they're sitting down drawing and they're drawing quietly, everything is clear. Expectations are clear. The activity is clear. Everything is predictable, and her anxiety is down. But then when, from her perspective, her mother comes out of nowhere with something unexpected, in this case, a compliment, then that creates that anxiety response. But it comes out like escalation and jealousy. So, this is just a theory, of course. So what I told her mom to do was just to say that she's about to compliment her sibling. So it's literally, hey, I'm about to give your brother or sister a compliment. Give her like 5 seconds to process that, and then give the compliment. So you're easing her into kind of this unexpected thing by giving her a transition. And it worked. It happened to work. So just by saying that a few seconds ahead of time, it helped to paint the picture for my client. Oh, something's about to happen. And then it was fine. And it worked the first time, it worked the second time, and it continued to work. And now it's not really needed because my client has learned that when mom does this, there's nothing threatening about it. And it doesn't push us off course. It's just kind of a quick compliment. So all that to say, it's not always obvious when something is an issue of a cognitive skill because it just looks like these intentional misbehaviors. Let me take a drink of water really quick. Anything I should be aware of? Sweet. So then what can we do? I really suggest that you have a calendar, and most people have calendars to a certain degree, but if you can take some time each week toward the beginning of the week to kind of lay out what each day will be like for your kid, that will help you have a visual for what you need to practice. So if you do this every Sunday, and it takes 15 minutes, and oh, on Wednesday we have a doctor's appointment, you can start to think about what am I going to need to do Wednesday morning or Tuesday afternoon to prepare my kid for this? What kind of conversations do I need to have with them? What sensory supports do I need to put in place? How do I need to prepare them? Those kinds of things. You have to be intentional, though. If you're trying to wing it, which is so easy for all of us to do, I mean, it's difficult for me to think ahead in these terms as well. If you wing it, you might do okay, but you're not necessarily always going to be catching everything that you need to plan. So just something to keep in mind. Also, as you're doing this and as you're thinking ahead, either with a calendar or just thinking about it, you want to ask yourself, is there anything in this scenario that I can practice or role play? Many of my clients struggle with going to the doctor's office. They might have had bad experiences before, or it's just terrifying. So what we don't want to do is just take them to the doctors one day. We might want to be taking them to the doctors the day ahead of time. And they know I'm not going to the doctors, I'm not doing anything, I'm just going to go, and so they can see the environment if they can meet the doctors ahead of time. Same thing with peer interactions. Is there an activity with a peer? We're going to go play, board games. Well, maybe you can find out what board games are going to be played. That way you can teach your kid ahead of time so they don't have to have all of those cognitive demands of learning how to play the game, playing the game, and then all of the social skills that it takes, in those interactions. How am I going to handle not winning? How am I going to handle all of the talking, which I don't normally do well with? So those are the things that you want to, as much as possible, practice or role play or expose them to and see if it helps. That's kind of what we're doing. What works for your kid? It's always important, both beforehand and then kind of as the activity begins, to go over what your expectations are of them, what behavior expectations there are, and then what the activity expectations are, and then have a plan in place. We call these proactive plans. What can we do if something goes wrong? If we have a video that we're going to be watching a little bit later, but just can we have a system in place where I can tap them on the shoulder, and that means they need to stop and think about how things are going? Or should we pre-plan breaks? If I'm going to take my kid to a game night that's 3 hours long, maybe I should be pulling them out every 30 minutes just to see how things are going. And if things are going great, then you send them right back in. It doesn't need to take very long to check in. If they're struggling, that's when you can talk to them about what their coping skills are, or maybe you can provide a sensory input. Something like deep pressure or something that they find calming to kind of get them back in the environment. Again, you're doing this just to see what works for your kid. Also, if you can't necessarily go to an environment ahead of time, look and see if you can find photos of the environment. Even pictures of the outside of a dentist office or the inside or of the dentist themselves, all of those things can be helpful. So those visuals are really important. Speaking of visuals really cannot be optional. Visuals are extremely important. They're important to everybody, but they're especially important to people who struggle with various cognitive skills. So let's talk about that. I describe visuals as doing the thinking for us. And I first kind of focused on visuals in my career as a way to help with receptive communication, so to process what's being said. If you text somebody something, then they can take all the time they need to think about what you said, right? As opposed to in real time verbal communication. They're also not going to miss any words because they're all there. And if they forget it, they can look again and it's right there to prompt them. And then what I began to realize is visuals really help us with every single cognitive skill. So as you can see here, receptive communication, working memory, that's an executive functioning skill. It's complicated, but it's kind of our ability to hold new information in our brain as well as to manipulate it abstractly. So if I ask you to close your eyes and envision a purple elephant who's holding an umbrella, I'm assuming that most of us who are in this webinar can do that with no problem. But we want to remember that that kind of thinking is extremely advanced. Using your imagination that way is extremely advanced. And working memory is a part of that. So visuals can help a person with their working memory. It can help them with planning and problem solving, thinking abstractly in general, and memory. We do have, let me see if I attached that here. Maybe I did not. I'm going to stop file sharing in that document. Thanks for bearing with me. So we talk a lot about the cognitive skills list that we have on our website, organbehavior.com. There's a list of cognitive skills. We start with the executive functioning skills and go down. And that is meant to be an assessment that you can do on your kid. And if you go down that list and you ask yourself, would there ever be a time when a visual would be helpful to support this skill? You're going to go down that list and you're going to know, yes, a visual can help with attention. A visual can help with working memory. It can help with social skills. It can help with expressive and receptive communication. Visuals are extremely important. So then why are they difficult? Well, in my experience in a lot of different environments, people don't want to take the time to make visuals. And a lot of times visuals are made, and when they don't work right away, it's frustrating because you took the time to make some kind of visual. Occasionally, visuals are destroyed when a kid has escalated. So you might make them a chore chart, and then there's a power struggle over chores, and everything, related to the chores gets destroyed, or even other things. In my opinion, the reason why visuals often don't work is because we're not using them effectively. A lot of people will make a visual and then they kind of give it to the kid or to the adult, and they kind of expect them to know what to do, but they're not taking the time to get the person's buy-in or understanding of what the visual is supposed to do. It's extremely important that they realize this is a tool that everybody uses. We all have visuals. We have our calendars. We have our phones that remind us to do certain things. It can help us to do a lot of things. So how can we get their buy-in? So if you've tried using visuals in the past and it hasn't worked, or you're not using any currently, I'll encourage you just to start with one visual. And you're going to want to make a visual that has to do with an area of life that is currently not a high stress area. So don't make a visual for the toughest issue and try to get buy-in. Make an issue, or make a visual for something that it really isn't that big of an issue, so that you guys can both figure out how this is supposed to work. We want to make visuals as much as possible with the person. Maybe they're artistic, right? Maybe they want to have a buy-in or a say into how the visuals should work. So not just what it looks like, but how it actually can work in the moment. We want to consider maybe making visuals that have characters from TV shows that the person likes, or from just media that they enjoy. Or sometimes using it with the person themselves. There are so many types of visuals. It can probably be its own webinar, but just off the top of my head, one visual that was really cool was for a young lady I worked with who had a lot of clothes. She was very fashionable. She loved fashion, but when it came to getting dressed in the morning, there was too much for her to handle. She couldn't visualize in her mind, because of abstract thought, what shirt and what bottom do I want to wear? What top and what bottom, and kind of figure out on her own how that would look. So what we did is we took pictures of her in all of her tops, and then and all these different outfits, and then we cut the photos, and then we put them in a binder so she could actually pick the top and then pick the bottom differently, pick it out the day ahead of time, and then there was no decision making that needed to happen first thing in the morning. She already picked it out. The visual shows what she'll look like, and so all of that work is already done. And of course, that kind of visual we have to make with her, practice with her, and make sure she gets it. Visuals. Just to also show how visual can help with thinking. I don't know if I've given this example in a video, but I was working with a foster provider, and the name of the game, we've already talked about it, but the name of the game with fetal alcohol is we need to do a lot less talking and giving the person a lot more time to think. So this wasn't happening. So I sit both my client and her foster mom down, and I ask my client the following question. I say, if you could do one of these things today, which would you do? Would you want to be a model in a runway show? Would you want to go to an amusement park? Would you want to take a road trip to the beach? Or would you want to sing a song? So I want you to think about for a moment what you think she picked out of all of those options. Which one did she pick? If you guessed she picked sing a song, the very last one, you are correct. And that is why she picked it. I intentionally bombarded her with too many novel options at the beginning of my sentence, and then I tagged on a normal, everyday thing that she's familiar with. But that's not really a true choice for her, is it? Because she couldn't really process all of those options. So if I'm not being mindful and I'm going through my everyday life, giving somebody yes or no questions, or kind of giving them these options, they give me an immediate answer. If I'm not thinking, I may not be aware that I am not even posing the question to them in an effective way. So what I did is I took my visual that's portable. It's just a blank piece of paper that's laminated. And if you do that and use a white or dry erase marker, you'll be able to have kind of a whiteboard wherever you go. And I drew out pictures for each of those options. So, going on the road trip to the beach, going to an amusement park, being a model in a runway show, and then singing a song. And I gave it to her and I said, don't answer right away, just think about it, like we talked about before. And do you think she chose sing a song the second time? She didn't, right? So that kind of showed the foster provider, like, whoa, she really isn't processing all of those things, because singing a song is not the right option, right? All of those other things are much more fun. They're much more novel, and the singing a song she can do at any time. But if we're not being careful, we're not picking up on this lack of processing. And so this is where visuals, again, can help us. And again, this was a normal, everyday conversation. We weren't talking about anything tough. We weren't talking about behaviors or the difficulty she's having at school. We're just having an everyday conversation, and that is the amount of support that she needs. So something for us to keep in mind. I thought that I attached the river visual, but I did not. So in our podcast recently, we made a visual that we talked about in the podcast that kind of explains how to do it, and then there's a PDF on our website. One moment, can you open up another tab and go to the website under resources and just give me the link to that visual and then paste it in the chat window so people can click on it? Excuse me. So the river visual, essentially what it does is it does help with those more complicated conversations about a person's obstacles in life, what their obstacles are to go down the river, and then the supports that they need. So it opens up a way for you to visually have a conversation, just as opposed to verbally saying, hey, what do you want me to do when you get upset? Or, what should we do when you struggle with this? Even that kind of visual and just taking the time to go through it that way can help both of you kind of understand what needs to happen. Okay. OregonBehavior.com. Sorry, one moment.
OregonBehavior.com/forms.
No, resources.
Yeah, but it's
not there. Okay.
No, it is there. It's under forms for parents, under resources/parents.
Oh, okay. So if you go to OregonBehavior.com, the address will be at the end of the presentation. Then it's under, what's the tab called?
Resources/parents.
At the very top, there's a resources/parents tab. And if you go on that list, you'll find a bunch of resources, but our river visual is there. Okay. Cool. So let's talk about another essential support. And we don't always think about adjusting our expectations as being a support, but it is. It is a legitimate support that people need. And we want to remember, why are they needed? Because fetal alcohol is a physical, brain-based disability. And just like any other disability, there's going to need to be accommodations made, but they're going to look different. We're not talking about, ensuring somebody has the right amount of adaptive equipment like a wheelchair or a walker. We're not talking about, supporting somebody with an alternative visual or communication system if they can't hear. We're talking about adjusting behavioral expectations as well as what demands we're putting on a person. And this is difficult for a lot of people. The reason why adjusting expectations is considered, in my opinion, to be a support is because when you do it, you're actually going to help the person learn skills. If you stick with your original expectations 100% of the time, especially if they're kind of typical expectations that we would expect of any 8-year-old or any 12-year-old or any 21-year-old, then that's just going to create stress. And you're not going to be seeing a lot of success, and skills are not built through a lot of difficulty and a lot of struggle and a lot of arguing. Skills are built through success. So what you might have to do is adjust a certain part of your expectations. That way the person can be successful with just one piece of it. And then once they can be successful with that, you can begin to add more and more expectations. This would happen in most situations over a longer period of time. And there are so many factors, even other than cognitive skills, that can go into why a person isn't being successful, that just adjusting our expectations will help you figure out what those factors are. Maybe it's anxiety, maybe it's sensory, maybe it's social. Those are the things that we got to be keeping in mind in addition to those just general cognitive demands. When a kid experiences stress over a long period of time, that can create trauma. That's what trauma is. Trauma is stress. Some trauma has to do with like one big event, something like PTSD. There might be one big event or something that a person remembers, but a lot of trauma is small stressors, small instances of being unsuccessful, but continuing to happen over a long period of time. And when we expose a kid to that, that can make things worse down the road. So that's something that we really want to avoid. If there's something that just keeps making stress and we can adjust expectations and relieve that stress, that's going to help everyone until they can learn the skills to then go back, a little bit more toward that original expectation. So why is adjusting expectations hard? Well, first of all, adjusting expectations is not how most of us were raised, right? Most of our parents did not see that we were struggling and just say, okay, let's do this instead, or just forget it, we'll do it later. They kind of pushed those expectations and then punished us when we couldn't. And as we grew up, we kind of learned for ourselves, like, I need to do better. I need to try harder. I need to make this work. I need to pull it together. But that doesn't really work for anybody, much less somebody who does not have the skills to meet the expectation, right? It doesn't matter how many times, I insist that a kid do a skill that they don't have. If they don't have the skills, it's not going to happen. So I got to take a step back and, kind of look at what supports can I put in place. Things that can trick us as well. Sometimes, again, it looks like they're just refusing to do something. Our kids are not going to tell us, I can't do this. They're going to say, leave me alone. Shut up, go away. They might say a lot of things because they know on some level that they can't do it. And so it's just easier to kind of lash out to try to avoid that demand than it is to try to verbalize what's going on. They may not even know fully themselves, especially when they're younger. Maybe they've done the skill before, and so we kind of naturally just assume they're going to do it again. They're going to do it again. And then when it doesn't happen, we can have a power struggle if we're not immediately thinking, oh, this could be a brain thing, right? If we impulsively kind of react as a typical parent. Adjusting expectations requires us to be flexible. And we just released a series of videos on how when we are flexible as parents, or when you are flexible as parents, outside factors can stress you out. Your extended family doesn't get it, maybe. The teachers at school don't get it. Maybe the therapist doesn't get it. There are outside factors who are telling you you shouldn't be adjusting expectations. You're just going to teach them that they can misbehave. But that's not what we're doing. We're not adjusting expectations just to avoid an issue, though sometimes we are for the immediate situation, but we're adjusting expectations so the person can start to see some success, and then we can build on that success. And just a quick note, adjusting expectations isn't just like in the moment kind of stuff, like, I don't want an escalation, I'm gonna, adjust my expectations. We have to constantly adjust expectations proactively, right? If you know your kid can't handle 2 hours at the mall, then you are naturally not going to take them for a 2-hour mall trip. That is adjusting expectations. If you know that your kid can't handle 8 mainstream classes a day at high school, then you probably have taken steps already to get them on an IEP and have it be a mixture or a special ed, whatever it is. So adjusting expectations is something that's needed both proactively and then in the moment as a reactive measure.
Will they be able to get a PDF of the
Yes, the PDF of the slides we already made shareable, but let me just do it again here because I stopped it. If any of you are not able, I'm going to do it right now. Sorry. Okay, so now something should have popped up on your screen to allow you to download the slides. If you are not able to, please send me a message on Facebook or email me, and I will just email it to you directly. What's that? Oh, and you can minimize once that you can minimize the button to see the chat window again if that's what you're looking at. So just some things to keep in mind when it comes to adjusted expectations. Excuse me. When there is something that is continually a problem, you want to pause yourself, adjust your expectations and ask, where can the person be successful? So if you were to say, go clean your room to your kid, and that's not going to happen, then instead of continuing to say that and having power struggles, you want to ask yourself, what can my kid do? Maybe they enjoy vacuuming. That's the example I have here. Then I'm going to get them into the routine of vacuuming, have some success with that for a few weeks, and then start to add something else. Like maybe we're going to make our bed as well. Again, just because they're struggling to do things, it doesn't mean that they don't want to do it. Making your bed takes cognitive skills. It takes planning, and then you have to actually make the thing work. Fitted sheets, I still struggle with fitted sheets half the time. So doing it with them can really help. That's why I say offer direct support, because as you're helping a kid kind of do these tasks that maybe a part of you thinks they should just be doing themselves, you might get information as you observe. Oh, they struggle with this part of this task. If I just sat down and just showed them how to do it, that might solve the problem, right? Or if we practiced it, that might solve the problem. So you're adjusting your expectations so you can slowly teach skills. And then we also need to remember that we're going to have to adjust expectations occasionally, even if they have performed the task themselves. So you might teach them to make their bed. They make their bed for a year, and then suddenly, bam, there's a problem. Our gut will say they're just refusing. They don't want to do it. But let's not jump to that conclusion first. It's possible, but let's take a step back, put in these supports again, and see if that can help. Excuse me. It's really important that when we're dealing with something that is continually a problem, that we learn to let go of our original expectations. And I'm sure most of you have figured that out. So, letting go of the fact that you think your 12-year-old should be able to clean their room on their own, that's a value. And so adjusting that will make it less stressful for you. And of course, that's easier said than done. Can I try to get me a Kleenex? The next one I want to talk about with you, is mindfulness. And there's, a lot of people aren't sure what this word means. Thank you. Hold on one sec. When I say mindfulness in the context of this training, I mean just being aware of what is happening around you. And not letting your thoughts kind of cloud. So if we're going to think about ourselves first, if you listen to podcasts while you wash dishes, or if you watch TV while you do chores, you are not being mindful, and you don't need to be necessarily. But what being mindful would be is you turn off those distractions and you are actually focusing on everything that's going on as you're washing the dishes or as you're cleaning. So how does this relate to what we're talking about? Well, if our kids could just learn to not run with things, but to just stop and take a step back and observe the situation a little bit more completely, intentionally look at other people's social cues, or think about what is expected of me right now, let me actually remember what's going on, a lot of behaviors would decrease, right? They just have to learn to improve in their ability to think. And so getting them to do that and teaching that skill over time might be a strategy that will help decrease behaviors. So being mindful, especially what we're about to talk about, will help with processing. And we're going to watch a video that will explain what processing is here in just a moment. Why is it hard? Well, like I said, we're not always mindful. We allow our thoughts to kind of just keep going, as we're going about our daily lives. We're not necessarily focused on what is happening around us in this moment. It takes cognitive skills. So there's something called mindfulness meditation, which is kind of a separate thing than what we're talking about. But in either case, being mindful requires a lot of executive functioning skills because you're actually focusing on what's going on around you and not letting distractions or other thoughts come into play. And that takes quite a bit of executive functioning fuel. It takes practice to be mindful. We're going to talk about how we can help somebody practice that in a moment. And then too many inputs. So if I'm working on somebody with being mindful, but there are too many distractions or things going on, it's going to be a lot slower progress if it works at all. So those are some things that I want to keep in mind. So one way that we can work on just stopping to think and being mindful is to make what's called a stop and think plan. So now we're going to try something where I can apparently play a video. This is a video I made not too long ago. It didn't get very many hits, so I'm hoping that most of you haven't seen it and that you find it helpful because I think it's one of my better videos. So we're going to play it and we'll see what happens. It should just play on your screen.
In our last video, we talked about some unhelpful ways that we often respond to escalated people. And you'll remember that most of my suggestions were about letting the person think. But why is it that giving people time to think can help them make better choices? Well, it has to do with processing, which is important both when we're escalated and when we're going about our everyday lives. In this video, we'll talk about what processing is and how we can intentionally work to improve processing abilities. When we do this, we give the person far more control over their behaviors and their choices. When we say processing, it can mean different things depending on which area of the brain we're talking about. For example, there's processing verbal communication, or what we call receptive communication. That's skill number 16 on the Organ Behavior Consultation Cognitive Skills list. We'll link to the list in the description of this video. This kind of processing involves the brain listening to and making sense of speech in real time. People with FASDs and other developmental disabilities usually struggle with this, but it's an essential skill, perhaps the most essential skill to provide support around. You can watch several videos on receptive communication and how to support it on our YouTube channel. Another kind of processing is processing the social cues that people are giving us, which is captured in skill number 23 on the cognitive skills list. If I'm talking to someone, my brain is constantly processing their response as we interact, and I can adjust what I'm doing or saying as needed. This ability can vary in people with FASDs, but usually it's difficult, especially when they're younger. We also have general processing of situations around us, and that's really what we're talking about today. At every waking moment, our brains are determining what's going on and if we're safe. People with FASD and other developmental disabilities often struggle with new or unfamiliar situations in real time because there are so many new factors for their brain to process. Now, when you struggle to know what's happening around you, it often leads to anxiety, frustration, overstimulation, or escalation. Let's think about the person you're supporting and the behaviors they struggle with. Ask yourself how many of these behaviors would improve if they could just learn to stop and think about what's going on in a more intentional way, as opposed to not being able to process and being swept up in situation after situation, unable to clearly think about all of the things that they need to think about. So today, I'd like to introduce a specific proactive plan that you may be able to use with the person you're supporting, which I call a stop and think plan. The goal of this plan is to slowly, over a long period of time, help someone improve in processing in the moment. This is a long-term plan that you may have to revise and use many times before you start to see an effect. But if we can get it to work, it's going to have a great impact on a person's life. First, let's look at how this plan can be helpful and actually play out in everyday life. Let's think of this as an experiment that you can try and see how it works for you and the person you're supporting. Please feel free to comment on this video or on our Facebook page and let us know how it's working. Josh and his daughter Wendy are at the playground. Wendy does very well with younger kids, though sometimes she gets a little too excited and plays a little too rough with them. Josh is watching her close by, and when he senses that she's beginning to get too excited and isn't processing the social cues of the children she's interacting with, Josh says, "Wendy, are you thirsty?" Wendy pauses what she's doing and looks at the other kids, and then calms down. Josh typically asks her if she's thirsty about once every 15 minutes. Maggie and her son Sean just arrived home and are putting away groceries together. Sean frequently takes sweets into his room and has done so for several years, despite many conversations about it. Maggie sees him grab the bag with some cupcakes in it and touches his arm twice with her finger. Sean puts the cupcakes away and continues to help unload groceries. Mark and his adult client Jose are at a game store looking at Pokemon cards that Jose is considering buying for an upcoming tournament. Jose sees a $30 card behind the counter and says that's the card he wants to buy. Mark says, "Let's stop and think about this," and he and Jose move away from the counter into another area of the store where Mark can ask Jose questions without anyone else hearing. After about 3 minutes, Jose decides that he wants to look at other cards before making a decision about the first one he saw. Janet and her teenage daughter Caitlin are at a friend's house, where Caitlin is eating and talking with several other teenagers. Janet notices how great Caitlin is doing, and when their eyes meet, touches her nose. Caitlin stops to think and then looks at her mother, unsure as to what she needs to think about. Janet gives her a thumbs up and a wink. There's nothing that needs to change because Caitlin is doing a great job interacting with others. These 4 scenarios show various different ways that having a stop and think signal can be used. It can be used to redirect behaviors as they're happening, which is how Josh and Wendy used it on the playground. It can be used proactively before there's even an issue, as Maggie used with Sean to get him to think about previous conversations about sweets. It can be used to help with executive functioning skills and decision making, as Mark and Jose showed us in the game store, and it can be used to reinforce good situations, as Janet did with Caitlin at their friend's house. So, how do we set up such a system? Well, you talk about it and make a plan ahead of time, which we refer to as proactive conversations and proactive plans. We have several other videos on this process on the channel, so I won't talk about it here. But remember, it's important to make the plan during a time when the person is doing well. You can't do it in the moment. You also want to practice it several times and try to keep it lighthearted. Each scenario also provides a different example of prompts that can be used. Generally speaking, we want our prompt to be discreet enough so that if we use it in public, it doesn't draw negative attention or embarrass the person that we're supporting. Josh and Wendy came up with a great code phrase of "Are you thirsty?" which they practiced, and Wendy knows means stop and think. Maggie and Sean's prompt involved physical touch, which can be helpful to avoid too much verbal communication during a time when we want to be encouraging thinking. Mark and Jose in the store had developed a less discreet but unthreatening prompt of "Let's stop and think about this." Jose knows that this doesn't mean no, it just means that we need to stop and think about certain variables, and that is what Mark is there to help him to do. Janet's signal to Caitlin is also nonverbal, and she discreetly touches her nose to remind Caitlin to stop and think. Our last scenario with Janet and Caitlin shows us that we want to utilize the principle of stop and think even when things are going well, because processing abilities can still struggle during these times. We want the person that we're supporting not only to be able to stop and assess when they need to change their behavior, but also be able to stop and assess when everything is going well and to feel good about it. Again, our goal here is that by intentionally prompting the person we're supporting to be mindful of what's going on and to stop and think, eventually they'll develop an improved ability to do this all on their own. And everyone's different. Maybe some people will improve to the point of prompting themselves all in their mind, or perhaps they'll develop their own visual prompts which they can use in their everyday life, like a bracelet they wear or a recurring reminder on their phone, and it prompts them to stop and think. Even if they always need some kind of support from another person to remind them to stop and think, that's okay too. Another benefit of this approach is that we actually let the person think and use their executive functioning skills in these situations. It's so common in developmental disabilities that both parents and paid caregivers give the answer instantly without letting the person think on their own. Sometimes redirecting immediately is necessary, but most of the time, if we could just stop ourselves from impulsively spouting off the answer, the person can figure out a course of action on their own. They just may need to be prompted to do so and given some time. When we're constantly redirecting and just telling somebody what we want them to do, they may comply, but they aren't really using those problem-solving executive functioning skills. Or in many cases, when we tell them what we want them to do, they may become oppositional or escalate, which creates a whole new situation. Having this plan in place and practicing it helps us to remember that we need to slow things down, give the person time to think, and help them use their executive functioning skills as they move more and more toward independence. I hope that you found this video helpful. If you haven't already, please like our page on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and subscribe to our channel here on YouTube.
Okay, so hopefully that video kind of gave you an idea of what I'm envisioning for these stop and think plans, and how they can help teach skills, be mindful, and start to process situations a little bit better. Let me just get the slides back up. Cool. So I hope that this training was helpful for you. I just want to go over some final thoughts. I understand that it's not always easy to make a lot of these supports work in everyday life. And so that's what I continue to try to help you guys to brainstorm and figure out how can we make this practical for our family. Also want to keep in mind that many of the supports don't work the first time, because a lot of it is about gathering information as you continue to narrow down what could be contributing to the behavior. And just, sometimes people have bad days, even with all of these plans in place. And again, I can't emphasize enough, we've made several videos on this topic, but you want to practice the supports or the plans that you make with the person as much as possible ahead of time, trying to avoid kind of in the moment problem solving as much as possible. And again, that will help everybody. So many of you probably already connected with us on YouTube. You can subscribe to our channel. We have a Facebook page where we post all of our videos as well. We have a podcast. If you haven't caught that yet, it's called the It's a Brain Thing podcast. And me and Jill, who's a parent of a kiddo with FASD, we talk about various aspects of life, her perspective as a parent, and then my perspective, with what I do as a consultant. You can find that just at our website, organbehavior.com, and click on that logo, and you can listen right on the website. Or you can just go to iTunes, or if you're already listening to podcasts, you can search for it and you'll find it and add it to your program. Also, if you believe in what we do, I do want to quickly just ask that you consider supporting us every month. We have a Patreon link there toward the bottom. Patreon allows you to make monthly donations, and we have different kind of levels that you can give at, and there are perks for each level. We haven't really, gotten going on that too much. So, if you believe in what we do and you can give us $5 a month, I would really appreciate that. That will help us to make more videos, and get that information out to more people. Also, if you really wanted to support us, you can help us figure out how to do a live training or workshop in your area. So oftentimes what that looks like is, local organizations, working with them to make a training happen. We really try to make trainings happen at little or no cost to the people actually showing up. And so if you are connected with local organizations, either with FASD or developmental disabilities or even mental health, we offer a lot of different in-person training. So we're hoping to, see you guys more outside of the state of Oregon. Is there another slide, or is that it? That's it. Okay. Well, that was my first webinar. I hope it was enjoyable for you. It was kind of weird just talking at my computer, but thanks for watching.